Evening, everyone. Understanding the role of the server and client is very important for the development and deployment of an information system. A proper setup will ensure that your system is performant and secure. To that end, let's discuss the role of server-side and client-side programming, how software can be broken down into what the server should do versus what the client should do. Then expand on this by identifying how the network will be affected by the data being transmitted back and forth. Finally, discussion will shift to the thick and thin clients and which should be utilized. Consider for a second the Model View Controller or MVC software architecture. This style of building and planning software involves breaking all the functions of the program into three parts. The model is how the data is structured, while the view is how the data should be presented. The controller, on the other hand, handles the processing of the data. This can be either to generate a report of existing data or to parse new data inputted by the user. In the case of an application that must share data amongst multiple users across a network, we must employ the server. The server can take in data from multiple clients and then distribute that data back out to the clients as required. Looking at our MVC model, the server would then handle the controller aspects of the software. The model would be shared between the server and the client so they both understood how to handle the data. The reason the controller would exist on and be handled by the server is it could perform important things like validation of user input. It is a good idea not to inherently trust the client data. Client data should be validated and sanitized by the server to ensure bad data is not put into the system. This also reduces security risks, especially when it comes to things like SQL injection. In short, the client should be programmed to render data from the model and allow users to input new data, while the server handles validation and processing of the model data. Data will be continuously transmitted back and forth between the client and server, which means network performance could take a hit depending upon the size of the data, the number of clients, and the type of network. Think about an email message system, where users send small messages back and forth to each other. The messages shouldn't affect the network performance with a system running at several megabytes per second, a system network, and having large throughputs. However, if the user starts sending large file attachments, the network could start slowing down as the users initiate data transfers between the server and client by requesting the said large file attachments. It is for this reason that an information system architect should consider carefully what data should be sent between client and server. Going back to the idea that the controller, which handles the processing of the data, should be the work of the server. The question comes to pass of whether or not a thin client or a thick client should be used. A thin client acts strictly as a way to connect to the server and do work, where a thick client can do work without the server and merely uses the server to share data. Which is better? The answer depends, I believe, upon the use case. If the system requires very little processing by the client to make the data viewable, or if the client needs to have an offline mode, then a thick client should be used, as a thick client will be able to support the additional processing and or the support of an offline mode. The thin client is great in cases where network reliability and performance are high and all processing can be handled by the server. During this discussion, the role of server and client programming was covered, specifically how a software architecture like MVC can be broken apart to work with the server and client and how they would function. Then the discussion shifted to network performance and how the amount of and size of data can determine what processing client and server should do. The example of email was used with and without attachments. Finally, a comparison of thick and thin clients was covered. and how the client that is used depends heavily on the software that is being ran. Understanding client and server and the separation of data processing can be the difference between creating a system successfully and having one that has large security holes waiting to be compromised. Thank you and good night.